Thank you very much, Dr. Shireen, and thanks very much to the Economic Research Forum for asking me to chair this session. It's a pleasure to share the session where Professor Jacqueline Wahba has authored a paper and introduces the paper on the evolution of international migration. And of course, I wish to recognize the co-authors with Professor Jacqueline Wahba, Dr. Rawan Yasser, and Dr. Enda David. We also have with us the discussant, the lead discussant, Dr. Ayman Zohri, a noted expert on international migration in Egypt and in the region. In fact, in international migration worldwide. I will not read all the bios that have been given to me, but I'll just mention that Professor Jacqueline Wahba is a professor of economics at the Department of Economics at the University of Southampton and director of research in economics. And she was appointed Officer of the Order of British Empire in the year 2000. She is not to be introduced. Everyone knows, I think all the participants here know about the production, the valued and valuable production of Professor Jacqueline Wahba. Dr. Enda Davis is research officer with the Research and Development Division of the Agence Française de Développement, currently working, currently in charge of research projects on inequality, poverty, and migration. Dr. Rawan Yasser is a researcher at the Agence Française de Développement also, and her projects explore the issues of inequality, poverty, labor markets, and international migration. Dr. Ayman Zohri is an expert on population migration studies based in Cairo. He is the founding president and president of the Egyptian Society for Migration Studies, and he is also an adjunct professor at the American University in Cairo. And he is a very good friend as well. So I think I will stop here reading bios and ask my good friend, Professor Jacqueline Wahba, to introduce her paper. She has 20 minutes.
Great, thank you. So it's great pleasure to be presenting this work today, and I'm really sorry I cannot join in person. And I'm pleased that Rawan Yasser, one of the co-authors, is here in person, and Anda David as well is a third co-author. So this work is gonna focus mainly on international migration, and we're looking at the economic crisis, as we call it. And basically, the idea of the paper is to try to examine the patterns and the trends in international migration between 2018 and 2023. And as we've heard in the first session, there have been so many different shocks during that period. So we've had COVID, and COVID obviously as a pandemic had implications not only for the Egyptian economy, but for the global economy, and had long-lasting implications. Followed by that, we also had the Ukrainian-Russian war and its impact on food prices. And Egypt as well had its own share of problems in terms of devaluation, in terms of food prices, as we've heard. So over that particular, 5 or 6 years, there have been so many different, let's call them crises, which had impacted Egyptian households. So the aim of this paper is to try to examine whether international migration and remittances have been used as a livelihood strategy during that particular period. And more importantly, we know that international migration has been very important since the 1970s for Egypt. And the question we're trying to raise here is to what extent, this importance of international migration, of remittances, continue, and whether there have been changes in terms of the trends and in terms of the patterns. So we will be examining current migrants. We will also look at return migrants and remittances, and very briefly discuss the intention to migrate as well. So we're using two waves from the ELMPS. I'm not going to go into details of the data because we've already listened, to a very detailed description of the data sets. But just one thing to remind you is that we are focusing on individuals between the age of 15 to 59 years old. So the first thing I want to highlight is basically the return and the current international migration rate. So if we look at the percentage of individuals between the ages of 15 and 59, and first we start with, current international migration. So this is the dark bars we see. We see that between the 2 years, 2018 and 2023, the percentage of current migrants have increased. Interestingly, when we look at return migration, and this is gray bars, we actually find that return migration, or the share of return migrants among 15 to 59, has actually declined. So this is the first thing we observe. And when we look at household level as opposed to individual level, we see the same patterns again. We see that, overall exposure to international migration has declined from 14% to 11%, but this is mainly driven by an increase in current migrants, or the share of current migrants at households, and a decline in the share of returned migrants in the household. So this is starting to sort of suggest to us that during that period of economic crisis, there has been a push towards more out migration and less return migration. So if we look at the patterns over time, and obviously here in this top figure, which is the 5-year one, we are looking in 2023 at households, and we're asking households whether they have a current migrant overseas. And here it's important to remember one very important aspect is that if a whole household has migrated, we wouldn't be able to see that household. So here, and this is at least for the case of Egypt, since we know that the majority of migration tend to be to the Gulf, tend to be temporary, we actually observe that in 2023, when we look at the share of migrants and when they did migrate, given the temporary nature of migration, we actually find that more recent years have a higher share. But if we actually zoom in the period between 2018 and the period 2023, we actually see, this is the bottom diagram, we actually see clearly the impact of COVID and how COVID has actually led to a decline in the share of current migrants. And this, started to pick up again around sort of 23 and after that. The most interesting thing also to observe is the changes in the patterns of destination of current and return migrants. And one can spend, quite a long time looking at what has been happening to the patterns in destinations. But one thing which is very clear, which is the role, or the destination, the main destination here being Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia continues to be a major sort of destination with around 45% of current migrants, but also many returns as well. So it's again one of the countries with the highest returns in 2023. So this sort of highlights the importance of Saudi Arabia as a destination. But there are also other important aspects which we can see related to, for example, the importance of EU countries, although very small proportions, keeping in mind that many people who also migrate to EU countries tend to migrate with the whole household, not necessarily as just only one individual. But there, patterns suggest that there has been diversification in destinations, and not only Gulf states, but more recently, EU and OECD countries have sort of attracted more migrants. One very important issue which we wanted to examine is whether there have been changes in the characteristics of migrants, especially current migrants. And we observe that more recently, if we look at the educational level, we tend to find that those with secondary and post, right, have sort of increased as a share of current migrants. But more importantly, and what is distinctive about 2023 compared to 2018, is that typically, and this goes back to when we study and we look at current migrants' characteristics, right, in 1998 up to 2012, unlike previous waves and decades, what we observe here is that those who are unemployed out of the labor force are typically the ones who are migrating. And this is a different pattern to what we've observed before in earlier waves and earlier decades, where basically those who were migrating were already working before they migrated. Another important distinction which we see here, when we look at the wealth quintiles, and obviously, the top one are the richest and the bottom are the poorest, we actually find that there has been increase in those migrating from households coming from the bottom two quintiles and less from the top quintile. Obviously, we need to be cautious because this is the wealth quintile in 2023 of current migrants who have migrated earlier. So, this might be as a result of migration, but this is something to keep in mind. But what is important here is that the characteristics of current migrants have changed in 2023. So they are people who are not working, people who are more likely to be unemployed and less educated. One other important issue we examine is the migration rates by educational rates. And this is mainly because we want to know what is the share of individuals from a particular educational level who are migrating. When we focus on the current international migration first, we actually find that for all groups, except the university and above degrees, we actually find an increase in current international migration rates. And what is also very interesting is that the secondary and post have managed to catch up and have the same sort of level of immigration rate as the ones with university degrees. So basically, secondary and post secondary levels have 3.3% immigration rate, and university and above is a 3.1%. But statistically, those two values are the same. Another important aspect to look at is the return migration. And we find that return migration have actually declined for all groups, but still the case that those who are highly educated, those who are with university degree, tend to have, the lowest return, even though they have one of the highest immigration rates. Looking at return and focusing on 2018 to 2023, we actually again find that there has been, a clear sort of drop during the pandemic in, 2021 and 2022. We know that this is not only there impact of what is happening inside Egypt, but this is also the impact of what is happening in host countries. So we actually find, 2023, there has been, an increase again to around 8.5% here of our returnees have returned in 2023 compared to during COVID period when we had fewer returnees as a share of returnees in our sample. In terms of the characteristics of returned migrants and comparing 2018 to 2023, we find that in 2023, returnees were more educated, and the share of returnees who wanted to travel abroad permanently had increased, and they were less likely to actually have migrated in the first place because they were not employed. They were basically employed before migrating and migrated and come back. And unlike in, again, previous waves, we actually find that returnees are more likely to be employed. Typically, and very early on in the 90s and early 2000s, we tend to find that returned migrants would, many of them would be out of the labor force or would not necessarily be employed, while actually here they're more likely to be to carry on working even after returning to Egypt. And given the economic crisis, not only in Egypt, but the global crisis, which we have witnessed over the last few years, and when we look at the reasons for return migration from the final or most recent migration, we actually find that the return tends to be due to poor working conditions. But this has declined slightly, and what has increased also slightly is the end of contract. So those are still the two main reasons, poor working conditions, but, ending of contract because of the global crisis has also increased. We know that remittances have been one of the most tangible impacts of international migration, and Egypt has been in a very good place, even globally, being one of the top 5 countries receiving remittances. However, and as we can see here, also, when we look at during, 2017, 2018, when Egypt was receiving quite substantial amount of remittances, up to 10% of GDP, this has declined more recently, and we know that this has to do, to a great extent, to the exchange rate policy and also the restrictions in terms of withdrawing foreign currency. So the whole sort of domestic, let's say, macro management of the foreign exchange and foreign currency have led to this sort of drop. But it's important to note here that this is based on official remittances. When we look at, remittances and the households, the percentage of households receiving remittances in 2018 and 2023 in our data, we find a slight increase from 2.3% to 2.9%. So this is mainly because when we're asking households, we are, households receive remittances not only through official means, but also unofficial means. And this is also what we find when we look at the means of sending remittances comparing 2018 to 2023. Basically, there has been a significant drop in the proportion being sent through official banks and official channels, and an substantial increase in the percentage of remittances being sent through friends and relatives. So this sort of explains the discrepancy between the official remittances data and what we also observe, but also this, is an important issue to highlight, because basically we are losing, we have a huge leakage out of the system because remittances are not sent officially. In terms of other characteristics of household heads receiving remittances, we actually find that, there has been an increase among, those below secondary and post-secondary heads of households. And
5 minutes, please. 5 minutes.
Sorry?
You have 5 minutes. If you
Okay,
could wrap up in 5 minutes, please.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also, we find that the heads of households who are receiving remittances are more, are more likely to be those who are employed, but not necessarily those who were unemployed. So this is basically telling us that, remittances have been used as a coping mechanism, not necessarily just by the poorest and not by the richest, but mainly by the people in the middle between those two sort of groups. Another dimension which is of concern to is basically the percentage of individuals who intend to move. And the question in the ELMPS is basically about intentions to migrate in the next 5 years. So it's a very particular sort of time span. And within, this time span, what we find is that there has been a decline in the proportion of individuals aged 15 to 45 who said they would like to, or they're planning to migrate in the next 5 years for both genders. And this is also true for all educational groups and for all age groups. So one very important thing which we also find is that those who say they are intending to migrate, they highlight that bad living conditions and lack of jobs are the main two reasons behind intending to migrate. So this is important to sort of also highlight because there is a significant increase in the proportion who want to migrate because of bad living conditions and lack of jobs in Egypt. So to try to sum up, I think what is very clear is between 2018 and 2023, when things were tough, there has been an increase in current international migration rate and a decline in the return migration rate. But also the profiles of migrants has changed because, as we can see, the share of migrants with, lower education has increased. The share of migrants with precarious labor market status has also increased. And in terms of the migration rates, we find that, the secondary degree holders, their immigration rate has increased, but it is still the case that those with university degrees have, one of the highest immigration rates, but have the lowest return migration. And in terms of remittances are really important, and it's very clear through our findings that, they're being sent unofficially. And therefore, thinking about the macroeconomic conditions is really fundamental in, trying to channel remittances through official means. But overall, I think the results suggest to us that the recent economic conditions in Egypt have, changed the nature of Egyptian migration. But migration still and is expected to actually carry on becoming a very important feature of the Egyptian economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very clear presentation, as clear as all your writings, Jacqueline. This is nothing unusual. So thank you so much for the presentation. Without further ado, I will ask Dr. Ayman Zohri to come up with his observations and comments on the paper by Professor Jacqueline and her co-authors.
Um, Thank you very much, Professor Awad, and thanks go to ERF for inviting me to this very important gathering, talking about the Egyptian, the ELMPS, actually one of the very important surveys that we usually use in academia for not only for migration, but for all other issues, especially economic issues. Actually, I would like to congratulate Jacqueline and the other authors for this very important work, despite the fact that it is the only work on migration for this round of the survey. And I hope that with the availability of data that other colleagues can produce their own papers. But for this, actually, for this presentation, Jacqueline, I consider it as a chapter in the report of the this round of ELMPS. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that if it is only the only chapter on migration, I would like to you to theorize more or theorize a bit, and also to link the findings to maybe the Egypt HEMS 2013. I know that it's now outdated, and maybe also link it to other studies in the that were produced recently. I'm very glad that you tackled a very important phenomenon that no one tackled before, or it is under researched, and I know that you wrote a lot about it, which is return migration. I consider you as the most important researcher wrote about return migration in Egypt. It is very important simply because we have layers of returnees since the 1970s, and no one researched this category in depth other than you. So thank you very much for filling in this gap in Egyptian migration literature. Simply because I believe that we are a country of return migration, and I'm a little bit surprised by the low percent of households with return migration, but maybe because you limited the age to less than 60. So you left the old waves of returnees. I have a question about the decrease of the percent of return migrants in 2023 compared to 2018. What explains this decrease in the percent of return migrants? Is it due to a change in the destination, like more people go to non Arab countries, or is it because the duration of stay in Arab countries itself became longer? This is just a question about the return migration. With respect to migration profiles, I noticed that the educational level is of migrants is decreasing, and getting towards less education, or less educated migrants that compose larger percent of migration streams from Egypt. So any explanations about that? Another issue, which is the main reason for return, and it is almost the same in 2018 and 2023, but also even, it is very annoying to see that about more than 25% of the returnees return because poor working conditions. And why did they migrate? And also, is it linked to the free visa, or what's called al-amala al-sa'iba, so that they don't find work? Because it is now this phenomenon is extended, so maybe they get very official invitation to work and contract with regular procedures, but when they go there, they don't find work. So this may be a cause for this high level of unsatisfaction with the work there. The other thing is the return, termination of the contract or the end of contract, which is very common, especially with Saudi Arabia. Migration intentions is very low in both surveys. I don't know why, because actually, if you follow the media, you will have you will reach to. You feel that most of Egyptians, 80% of Egyptians, would like to go out or to migrate, though the percent is very low, 6.5 or 4% is very low. So this needs further analysis of the data and maybe linking them to other variables in an in-depth analysis. With main pull factors for intending to migrate in the next 5 years, and actually it's good to limit it to a specific period, so it gives better indicators than just leaving it as a sort of a dream. We find that almost 60% of migrants they want to migrate because of family, not family, high income, which is very traditional and very common in all markets until they reach equilibrium, and will not reach equilibrium very easily. So it is, it shows us a very traditional way even of thinking about jobs, maybe because most of them, they know that they will return. They will not stay forever in destination. Lastly, I have two questions about, or two comments about remittances, because actually this is a very important issue that's also under-researched at the micro level. We usually think about Egypt as one of the 5 recipients of remittances, but we don't dig down. We don't see the percent of households receiving remittances is low in both years, 2.3 in 2018 and 2.9 in 2023, which is very surprising. The other thing that I expected to see in the paper or even in the presentation and haven't found, which is the data on use of remittances. This is very important, and I hope that this information can be found in the raw data. Finally, the presentation and the paper is very good and very informative. Thank you again. Thank you, Professor Howard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zohri, for your comments and your suggestions. I wonder whether Jacqueline would like to reply or make comments now, or should we open the floor to those among the participants here who would like to raise questions or to make comments? I personally have a number of comments, but I will keep from doing them for the moment. I will do that later. So we have a comment or a question here. Please go ahead.
أنا مصطفى يونس من الجهاز المركزي للتعبئة العامة والإحصاء. طبعا بنهنئ أنفسنا والمنتدى البحوث الاقتصادية على النهارده على إعلان الداتا والبيانات لبحث سوق العمل. أحب بس أعقب على كلام دكتور أيمن اللي إحنا كمان بنضيف للمعلومات السرية دي إن إحنا بنحضر دلوقتي للميد هيمس إن شاء الله بس 2025 بإذن الله في أوائل 2025. أعتقد ده هيجاوب على تساؤلات كتيرة وتحليلات كتيرة قوي، لأن البحث طبعا متخصص في الهجرة بشكل أكبر يعني. فنتمنى إن هو برضو إن شاء الله على أواخر 2025 يكون بيقدم معلومات سرية تضيف لنا في تحليل أو اتجاهات الهجرة في مصر. شكرا.
شكرا جزيلا. دكتورة منى، تفضلي.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for an excellent and clear presentation, as Dr. Ibrahim said, and it's lovely to see you even online. I mean, after hearing certain storylines throughout yesterday and today's morning sessions, I think we were waiting for the migration to kind of complete the picture, because it is, you know, when there are certain adverse labor market conditions, you know, migration, or at least the intention to migrate would be, you know, a reflection of the outlet that, you know, certain segments of the population seek. There has been the mention of less reliance on remittances and some, for example, by female household headed, you know, on the incomes, in the incomes analysis paper. So female headed households seem to be less reliant on remittances and more reliant on, for example, pensions. But I just asked for the figure, and it is larger than what we expect. The number of female-headed households in 2023, it's 23.5%, Ragi. You know, and it is a bit higher than 2018. And it's likely that these are a large segment of the poorer households. On the other hand, you do report that there is an increase, but the numbers are also small. So I have two questions about that. One is there a tendency to underreport receipt of remittances, especially as you noted that they are received through unofficial channels? And is there a way that you can, by the fact that you follow the same households or something, you can detect that somehow, that there is underreporting or misreporting? Secondly, have you done analysis even on that small segment, about which wealth quintiles or which type of households? And again, female-headed characteristics would be an interesting one, to associate where the increase was, just for us to assess whether it has been effective in helping some of the poorer households. You also did a good job by highlighting the change in the educational, that's another question, the educational characteristics of the migrants and the return migrants. Dr. Ayman rightly also noted that knowing the destination of both the outmigration and the returnees would also be interesting, because we know that there might have been a change in the destination for Arab countries and the restrictions, or maybe a change in the kind of Arab countries that migrants go to. And also I thought, for those intending to migrate, even though it's a small sample, it will be good to look at their overall characteristics, especially age, which groups have they had some labor market experience, because you can follow a little bit, maybe from previous, retrospectively, you can know a little bit the history of their labor market experience and, interacted with age. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mona.
Dr. Ibrahim. Two questions from online, from Jose Eparguer. Has there been any economic upward mobility among return migrants? Are they, on average, at a higher wealth quintile when coming back compared to when they immigrated? That's the first question. And a question in Arabic: هل يمكن الاعتماد على مسح سوق العمل التتبعي كمصدر لبيانات الهجرة؟ فهو غير ممثل على الإطلاق من هذه الوجهة. كذلك الهجرة العائدة، وكيف يمكن الاعتماد على البيانات التتبعية في هذا الصدد، مع العلم أن حجم العينة غير ممثل. وفي تعليق إن المسحة الأجرية في عام 2023 بعد أحداث فيروس كورونا، وإنه إن في اعتقاد إن معظم آثاره قد تم التعافي منها. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have so many questions and comments. Would you bear with me so that I express also my comments, or would you like to reply as of now?
Oh, please go ahead, Dr. Ibrahim, and then I will answer for everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have my question, in fact, is related to the university level migrants. Do we have a breakdown by occupations, by type of diplomas? Because there is a difference between a law graduate and his or her migration, or a medicine graduate. So we know that in some occupations there is a high rate of, an increasingly high rate of migration. So this is my question. My observations are related to, I think it is clear that the terms and conditions of employment are behind. You mentioned precariousness. These are about the terms and conditions of employment. But you also mention, you say that poverty, the poor and the unemployed migrate increasingly. When we look, and this is a theorization that Ayman mentioned, the Egyptian migration conforms to the propositions of the new economics of labor migration theory. Families come together, they fund the migration projects. Migration is not long in duration, 6 or 7 years. Migrants send remittances to their families. Now, if we remember what Dr. Iman Helmi said in the morning, that families have less and less money to help each other. The coping mechanisms that we mentioned in the morning. So they have less ability to support each other. Who then will fund the projects, migration projects of the poor and the unemployed? Because we know that the poor and unemployed, in fact, do not migrate because they don't have the means to migrate. So they must rely on their networks, on their families. Now their families are not in a position to fund their projects. So what will happen? What will happen? I think this is a question that we should ask ourselves. The question of return, end of contract. More people return because of end of contract, and fewer people return because of deficient terms and conditions of employment. Does this mean that there is more acceptance of deficient terms and conditions of employment? Or does it also mean that there is less demand in the traditional labor markets of Egyptian migrants? Is that, what can you say about that? I also have a little bit about remittances. The figures of the World Bank and of the Central Bank of Egypt indicate an increase in remittances during COVID. And by the way, it's not only in Egypt. Not only in Egypt. According to the World Bank, there is an increase in remittances the world over. Maybe because migrants could not come back on vacations, could not send with their relatives. But there is an increase which does not conform to the findings here. By the way, there is information. The paper deals with the use of remittances. Mm-hmm. It deals with the use of remittances. The less return, will this be related to the increase of migration to OECD countries? Because in OECD countries, there is a possibility of a longer duration than in Arab countries. Is this, can we say that? Not finally. By the way, I can send you my notes. It's a very interesting paper. How can this reduction of migration, how can it be interpreted at a time of deficient domestic labor market outcomes in 2023? Migration aspirations have decreased after the Arab Spring. This is true, but the Arab Spring is 10 years. That was 10 years ago. Things have changed in the meantime. So how can you explain that? What is your explanation of that? So, of course, the questions and the comments, because the paper is very rich and your presentation and your paper are so clear. And so, again, I thank you and I give you the floor, and I will give you some time, because it's not fair to say, like in previous sessions, that you only have 2 minutes to reply.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the comments. May I start by just saying to the comment about CAPMAS collecting the new data. So this is the household integrated migration system, and so there is a new data which will be collected, and it will hopefully be done by 2025, which is what we've heard, from CAPMAS. Can I also maybe use that particular point to say that we are really fortunate to be able to use the ELMPS because of the efforts of ERF and CAPMAS making the data available. The problem with the HIMSS data, the 2013 one, is that the micro level data are not available. I have tried several times, trust me, to get access to the micro data, and I have failed. I'm not aware of anybody who have got access to the micro data for 2013. And this means that we are not able to actually share, we are not able to actually use that data if it's not shared. And this limits our analysis on Egyptian migration. So I think, if there is one request is, it is great that there will be new data collected, but I think it would be really important, given the number of questions raised by our paper and by the floor and discussants, we need to actually more and more data to be able to answer those questions. But let me try to focus on a few issues here. So the issue about the return migration and why is return migration declining, I think there are a number of issues here. So destination is one. So there is this change in destination, which we know is important. But we also have information from those who returned, and we actually find that more of them intended to stay permanently and would have stayed permanently if they were able to. So there is this change in also migrants planning to, as opposed to previously, come back. Actually, they would like to stay permanently if they are able to. But I think the data, the ELMPS data would give us, very rich data set to actually explore more who are those people who want to stay permanently and those who want to return, etc. But I take the point, it might be because we are limiting the age of 15 to 59. Maybe this is why. But we're seeing this drop. But this doesn't really explain the drop in return migration exclusively. I think it might, but not exclusively. In terms of basically the reason for return and the poor working conditions, so why are they migrating? Because they're still finding jobs, which probably in Egypt they might not have found. They're still earning higher wages, which again, they wouldn't have actually earned. Going to the comment by Mona about female-headed household, I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about, female-headed households of current migrants, because it might be that, it's a different type of female-headed household. But we haven't actually explored in detail what are the characteristics of those female-headed households receiving remittances, for example, and are they female-headed household because the current migrant male is overseas? But this is something which we need to actually look at, and perhaps other papers would be able to do that, because there are so many different things one can look at. But I want to come to the point regarding underrepresentation or underreporting of remittances. So this is not only common of ELMPS. There is actually a paper which looked at global household surveys. So there's this very well-known paper by Michael Clemens and David Mackenzie. And basically they looked at several households surveys, and they always find that households underreport remittances compared to official remittances data. In terms of what we are finding, we're not finding that there has been a decline in remittances, that this is what Dr. Brahim was saying. On the contrary, what we are using are the same data. Actually the trend is a World Bank data. It's, and this is very consistent with also the Central Bank of Egypt, record on remittances. What we know happened is that the exchange rate issue was a big sort of problem for remittances in Egypt. So, and I think this is well documented by the World Bank, by the Central Bank as well. And we know that more recently in 2024, things started to pick up more. We do know about the university level and the different occupations. And one of the things we can look at, but obviously numbers are small, is to look at, for example, medicine and doctors. So I've come across data, for example, from the UK, which actually shows that there has been this sort of huge increase, number of Egyptian doctors registering in the UK. And we're talking about something like 3,500, right? So this is, of course, in our data, we do not observe doctors in particular or particular sort of professions. And this brings me to the point which was raised by somebody online about, that ELMPS is not representative. No, ELMPS is representative of, is nationally representative. And what we do not observe in our data set are basically non-Egyptians. So because of when in 2023, right, we know that still non-Egyptians, were, let's say, a small minority. This was before the, the Sudan problems and more Sudanese coming. But we do not observe refugees, actually, and immigrants. We do observe, and we have representative data of returnees and current migrants if there is somebody in the household still in Egypt. There was a question about upward mobility in income. Yes, so I have two papers based on 2018, I believe, and 2012, looking at upward mobility. And we do observe that return migrants move upward in terms of wages, and they move upwards in terms of occupation. In terms of the thinking about the theory, I think what we find in Egypt is basically what we find in the migration theory and in other countries. And I'm going to pick on a country here, which is probably one of the well-known in terms of return migration and temporary migration as well, which is Mexico. So when migration starts, it's only the people, who are well-off tend to actually migrate. And as more and more migrants, actually, you move down the sort of income distribution, and you have people who are less well-off actually migrating. However, the very, very poorest can never sort of, manage to migrate. And there was a question, I think, by Dr. Ibrahim. So who will fund the migrants of the poor? We have a question actually on who funds the migration. And we know that in many cases, people borrow to migrate. Might not borrow from, very close family. They might borrow from friends or even from non-friends. And for some migrants, they actually might have to work for a year or so just to repay the loans they have borrowed. So we know that this is, so we know how this is actually funded even for the poor. So, and luckily we have questions about how migrants find their current jobs and how they fund their migration. So I hope I've covered most of the points, but thank you very, very much. It was really a great pleasure to have Dr. Aman Zohri and Dr. Ibrahim Awad, with all the comments and questions. I don't know whether Rowan wants to say anything to add anything to what I've said.
No, we thank you, Jacqueline, for the clarity of your presentation and for the additional clarity of your replies and your reactions to the comments. And Dr. Rohan, would you like, please?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think Jacqueline, you covered perfectly all the questions, and thank you, everyone. I don't have anything to add. I think we're already very late.
So many thanks, Professor Jacqueline Ouaba and Dr. Rowan for the paper and for the presentation. Many thanks for all the participants here in the session. And let's come to a close. Thank you so much again.